You're listening to You Would Think, the Philadelphia Flyers podcast. I'm your host, Kyle Collington, and joining me once again is the one and only Mr. Kevin Dursow. How are you, buddy?
I'm well. How are you?
I'm here. So it's a bit
well,
of a...
for this, yes. I mean, in general.
Yeah. It's
we're
a bit
healthy.
Of a mix.
We're
us as people are good. We're happy, healthy, and alive.
Well, that's the way. That's the way I always take the "How are you?"
That's fair.
Yes, I'm well. My week has been normal.
And now the team.
Yeah, and now we get into this stuff that everybody really wants to hear about.
Before we dive into the Philadelphia Flyers this week, I'm just going to remind you, subscribe to our YouTube, follow us on Twitter at YWT Podcast, follow Kevin at Kevin_Durso, find us on sportstalkphilly.com. Anyway,
where do you want to start?
Let's start with how they started the week.
Okay, fair enough. So we start here.
The losing streak snaps at 10.
Okay.
The Philadelphia Flyers get a victory over the New York Islanders on Tuesday night. Mm-hmm. They played a decent game.
Well, and this is what I tried to kind of foreshadow a little bit when we did last week's show, because as much as I kept coming into it going, help me find the win in the next several. Yeah. The two that I pointed out was the Islanders or Washington, because they seem to be the two most vulnerable teams of the group.
That is true.
And as we move forward to the rest of the week, which we'll get into, when you're playing the likes of Tampa Bay, which is still Tampa Bay, New Jersey is obviously on a different level this year. Colorado is going to come in as the defending Stanley Cup champions. There's an expectation that's different. Washington's not playing well at the moment, not near as well as they typically do. Right. They have more skill than the Flyers do. That's obvious, but they're not the powerhouse that they once were at this point. Like, now they're a borderline playoff team.
Right. And
the Islanders, for a good start, kind of let the Flyers hang in there during number 10 for 2 periods. And then kind of I felt the same way, when we get into the Devils game from Saturday night, I felt the same way. It's like, for 2 periods, you're not playing your game.
No.
Like, you're just letting this team hang around. And it's almost like you anticipated a night off kind of thing to an extent. I mean, look, you're not giving up a lot either. Like, right. You got to, like, it was a 2-2 game against the Islanders after 2 periods. It was a 1-1 game after 2 periods against the Devils. You're like, they're hanging in there, but it's not like they're blowing any team out or anything like that. Right. Like,
and then in the third period, the better team realizes that they're the better team.
Right.
Steps on the gas and the game ends.
Well, and that's what I think the difference was in this particular game against the Islanders, that for a change, it wasn't wait until the third period for something to happen. They had the lead
immediately,
but they had the lead halfway through the first period.
Yep.
They really, the whole thing about that game was you set the tone right away with the 2 fights in 8 seconds, separated by 1 second deal. Which
let's talk about that for a second.
Well, first of all, okay, listen, the first part of it, I don't understand the point of the second one per se. The first one, you knew it was coming because of everything from Saturday. Yep. There was going to be carryover, and it's not too often anymore. I mean, I think it's happened a little more frequently in the last 2 or 3 years, but it's not too often anymore that you get teams that play each other back to back in home and homes, like a shortened playoff series. So, and I think a lot of that has to do with the year that they played, where you play the same 5 teams over and over again.
Well, the NHL has confirmed that they liked that, and they're going to do more home and home series and more back to backs and more 3 and 5 type of things,
which makes partial sense. And I say partial sense for this reason. If you like that concept and you like the idea that, we could have these 2 teams play back to back, home and homes, keep doing this, create the rivalry.
Do you not like it?
No, it's not that I don't like it. They play the Penguins 3 times this year.
Yeah.
Like, you can't really exactly have a home and home and say you play each other 3 times in a year. This works when you play 5 times a year.
That's fair.
They've got to get back to the divisional teams play more often. And, as far as I'm concerned, take 1 game away from every non-divisional conference opponent and say, you play Boston twice, you play Buffalo twice, and give the divisional games back, because you should not have one. Like, the game, I think it's the game that just happened too on Black Friday. That should not be your only home game against the Pittsburgh Penguins in a year. It just shouldn't be.
That's fair.
Like, I shouldn't have to go down and watch 1 home game between the Flyers and Penguins, and then also have to watch 1 home game between the Flyers and the Anaheim Ducks or something.
Right.
Like,
and
that makes no sense.
And I don't necessarily know if we tune the numbers all the way back to where they're playing 7 or 8 times a year.
No, I don't think you go that far. I think you got to
5 or 6
5
would be nice.
I think because I think it would add up. I think it would equate to 5 if you kept taking away that one extra game.
Right.
Like, and I get it. You're in a challenging spot now because you're factoring in 82 games, 31 opponents, 16 of the opponents play in the other conference. So out of that, you have that immediately adds up to 32 games to get every team on everybody's home ice
and
once.
For the record, I do love that concept, and I do not think.
Well, yeah, because I think
to jeopardize that.
Well, because I think the problem you run in that case is, and I'll use Edmonton as an example because it's the easiest one I can pull. Do you want to be able to go down and see Connor McDavid once a year in Philadelphia, or do you want to see him come through once every 4 because you only play them once a year? It's every other time. So
I think it's incredibly important for the growth of the league that every star team or every team is in every arena.
Yeah. That every star player out there gets a chance to play in every city. Exactly.
Yep.
So I agree with that.
I think it's incredibly important.
But we're also losing and maybe it's, maybe I'm grasping at straws with that a little bit, but I think we're losing the natural rivalries because it feels like the only way you're going to ever get that is with the 7-game playoff series.
Well, so there's 8 teams in your division, so that's 24. So 24
non-divisional.
24 non-divisional teams.
Right, so that should equate to 48
So that's 48 games. So if
then you divide the rest up among, exactly. You divide the rest up among the other 7.
82 minus 48 is 34. So divide 34 games by 7 opponents.
It's 4 to 5. It's 4 to 5. So
one team gets 4, everyone else gets 5. That's pretty close. That's pretty close, man.
But see what you just did, though? You doubled your home games.
Yep.
So 2 games against Pittsburgh, 2 against the Rangers, 2 against Washington, 2 against the Devils, 2
Absolutely
against, and that's the way you do it. And I know it's not,
and then you get to do stuff on the schedule where you get to do home. 1 year it's home and homes, and then the next year you play 2 in Pittsburgh, 2 in Philly. Then the next year, you get to do some really fun stuff with the schedule, and you can separate them. I'm not talking about it at the same time, but
with obvious attention to building availability because that's what goes into the schedule. I think that what you should honestly do is guarantee if you can play 4 games within a division every year, if you structured it that way, you should guarantee 1 home and home against every divisional opponent.
Maybe.
You're gonna play every year 1 home and home against every divisional opponent, and the other 2 will be scattered based on availability.
Okay, but what if you're playing 4 games and you play 2 in one city early in the season and then 2 in the other city late in the season?
I see where you're going with it. I would do it the other way around. Okay. I would split the cities and make it like I said, make it a mini playoff series with travel, with everything.
And honestly, if that's your schedule,
right, and put 2 together, so you create that little animosity back and forth, and then put the other 2 in the right spots. Like to be honest, I wouldn't be putting home and homes like that in April, but I'd make sure that I had a couple of divisional opponents minimum, in April.
I'm already thinking of fun concepts. If you do the home and home every year, you'll develop a rivalry like college football where you win a small trophy based on the aggregate score of those 2 games. Come on, how much fun does that sound?
This is the stuff that the NHL needs, right? Like something that generates a little bit more of a buzz. I'm not trying to sit here and say this is the answer to doing this per se, but
No, we're talking about a fun idea. We're not.
No. But what I'm getting at is you just said, okay, do a home and home, and the winner of the home and home based on the aggregate score gets a trophy, right?
Right.
Between the rivals. Why not give out a trophy for the Winter Classic every year? Give out a trophy for the Thanksgiving showdown.
But then the Chicago Blackhawks will just win them all, and
Well, then pick other teams to be in it.
Well, they can't do that now, can they?
They can. They won't. That's the difference.
All right. Anyway, back to the Flyers. Rewinding all the way back to the Philadelphia Flyers.
Because this had to do with the Islanders, right? So, and the Islanders were, but the idea that the home and home created a situation with the fights at the beginning.
And it was interesting.
You knew the first one was coming. To be honest, I kind of knew the second one was coming too. Because
at some point, for sure, Nick Deslauriers wasn't not fighting in that.
Well, that's not the reason, to be honest. Because color me surprised on the Saturday night in Long Island when Ross Johnston's not in the lineup against the Flyers, because I feel like he's almost always thrown in for that purpose, especially when Nick Deslauriers and Zach McEwen are.
He might have had a super important AHL game to play.
No. He was up. He was a scratch.
I'm joking.
So no, because I just going off of the things. So but like that shocks me when he's on the active roster and scratched for a game against the Flyers for that purpose, especially when Nick Delorier and Zach McEwen and the like are on the other side. Like, it kind of just screams put the tough guy in for this one at least.
Right, like the Philadelphia Flyers are the team that you put the tough guy in for. Like if you are,
especially now,
right? If you have the guy on your roster, why isn't he in the lineup?
Well, like, and I say especially now because to an extent, like last year, I could understand it. They didn't exactly have one of these guys. It was McEwen or bust.
And for the record, I'm not happy about that. That's not something I'm bragging about. This isn't the Broad Street bull. No, they're trash, and all they do is hit people. Like, I'm not. They're a garbage. Right, they're a garbage hitting team. Like, they're not good.
Right now, okay, so let's move beyond the first 8 seconds.
Right.
Because here's the thing, and look, we can discuss this further if it comes back around to this. I'm not going to make this a definitive point of every argument that we make, but it does exactly what it's intended to do, right? You're 8 seconds into the game, and the building is going nuts because 4 guys fought in the first 8 seconds. It creates an atmosphere, and right or wrong, whether it should happen or not, whether it's phased out of the game more or not, it doesn't make a difference. It's still something that people get up for because it's you know what it is? It's a show within the show.
I agree.
Like it very much is sideshow activity to an extent. But what to also an extent, what else are they supposed to do to generate a buzz?
And also those 4 players: Matt Martin, Zach McEwen, Nick Delorier, and Rouse Johnston.
Right. Let's not cover the Islanders as Saints here either.
Right. Those 4 players specifically, that's why they're in the lineup.
Right. Like
right?
exactly.
None of them are there to be power play snipers. Like, they are all there.
Right. Which is
to
why
fight 10 seconds into the game to get a crowd going.
Well, and let's be real, okay? Nothing happens like that in the first 10 seconds of a game without a conversation during warm-ups, and they all had conversations.
Oh, and see it. They showed it on the broadcast.
Right. So you knew it was coming. It was not a surprise. The only thing that was surprising was the second 1 second after the first. You kind of thought you would let it simmer a little bit more, and instead it was, nope, we're going right for it. Like, here's how premeditated the first one was. The first one was the Zach McEwen, Matt Martin one.
Right.
Matt Martin wasn't even in the starting lineup. McEwen was.
Right.
Now, McEwen was in the starting lineup not because he's the tough guy. He was in the starting lineup because he had to play so high up in the lineup that he was actually with legitimate players.
Right.
Other than, like it was kind of the hybrid third, fourth line jumps to the second kind of deal. Because they were without tons of players at that point.
Walking wounded.
They were, at that point in time, you added Tony DeAngelo to the injured list for that particular game. I think... They still didn't get anybody back for that one either, or maybe they did. Lawton was back, and so Lawton was back. Konechny wasn't yet. So Scott Lawton was the one guy who came back in.
I don't know how the thinnest roster is the one that won the game, but here we are.
Well, we'll get to that because I have 2 theories behind that to begin with. But he wasn't on Matt Martin wasn't on the ice. They made a change immediately off the face-off. He hopped on, and it's let's go. Okay. At least the next one was off the face-off. Delorier's lined up with Johnston, and you're like, okay, you're talking right as the puck drops. That's how that happens 1 second in.
So I know why the rule exists. Mm-hmm. I do. I know why they changed it. It's for safety. It makes sense.
Right.
I wish the ref could wave off certain guys and tell them they're allowed to take their helmets off. Like, when they're circling, they need to be able to go, hey. You guys are both experienced adult fighters. Like, you both know what you're doing here.
Right.
You can take the buckets off. And I know why they don't, and they're never going to. And they're never, ever, ever going to. And
right. If nothing else, they continue to implement more when it comes to that.
Right. Like, when the helmet comes off, they jump in faster.
No, not just with that, but I'm talking about in the general of the game. I know. With the rule if you lose your helmet, you got to get off the ice or put it back on. They just instituted something I saw the other week that any player entering the league after 1920, so anybody who's already in and anybody who's been in for a couple of years now,
will have to wear helmets during warm-ups.
Correct. Yep. And that's, again, it's a protection type thing. So you eventually, you get
Travis Konechny breathing a massive sigh of relief right now, by the way.
There's a handful of them. I believe that I think Ivan Provorov's done it a little bit lately. Scott Lawton definitely does.
Every beauty in the league. Well, and apparently Scott Lawton too. Listen, I love Scott, but he would tell you. Come on now.
Anywho, so following up on the fights, you get to the point where like this is how quickly it looked like this game was going to unravel because they took 2 more penalties in almost immediately after.
Yep.
Like less than 3 minutes into the game, you're down 2 men. It's a 5-on-3 for long enough of a period of time.
Scary long time. Yeah.
Right. It was probably about a minute 23, I want to say, or something like that.
Somewhere in that neighborhood, yeah.
And it didn't take long. Noah Dobson scored on a one-timer.
Yep.
Pretty standard stuff. And they get the lead, 1-0. And they still have power play time. And you're and you're basically like where I'm sitting for that one, you're going, okay, we're off and running. Here we go again. And really where the game does take a turn, and the Flyers acknowledged it after the game, and I think that you saw it in the game. They get a shorthanded goal.
Yep.
Travis Sanheim scores a shorthanded goal coming up a rush. And finishes the play. They actually waved it off at the very beginning for a second because I believe the thought was that the Islanders had possession. There was a penalty coming up because you'll see, I want to say it was Lucas Sedlak who was leading the rush and got hooked. And it was, okay, there's the penalty. They had something coming up. But they score there, and then they scored again off the face-off, and that was Kevin Hayes scoring a goal just shy of halfway through the first period. And for the rest of the game, it was just a chess match for most of it. I mean, it was not a very high-volume shooting second period. The third period, they really locked it down. They outshot the Islanders 12-7. Like, really good, complete game. Probably, like, truthfully, I think they were right when they said it. The most complete game they've played all year, probably outside of the opener. Like,
that's fair.
Like, I don't really recall many other games that you can sit there and say it was complete. Carter Hart didn't exactly stand on his head in this one. I mean, he made some really good saves, but he wasn't.
He didn't have to.
He didn't make 50.
No, but he
made 23. He made 23 on 24. Yeah. Reasonable night at the office. Yep. Not getting pressured a ton. Not giving up a ton off the rush. Really structured play. It all seemed to work out really well.
Yeah, I have no idea how it happened, but like I said, the thinnest roster they've iced in a long time.
Pretty close, yeah. I mean, I think I would say that probably the real thinnest was the game before, because I think at that it depends on how you want to consider the swap of D'Angelo coming out and Lawton going back in from an injury standpoint because that's about the only change that was different between the two. Like the rest of the lineup was what it was.
I will say, and we talked about this a little bit during the game. Ivan Provorov on the power play on the power play 1 looked decent. I think he carried the puck well. I think the penalty kill unit, as you mentioned, kind of did sag off a little bit because they're not quite as expecting shot quite as much. But I did want to mention that the power play did look decent in that game with Ivan Provorov running it.
Sure. I mean, well, and they didn't have a lot of opportunities there because the penalties really only evened out later. So you had, I mean, the opportunity was there too, because I believe it was with about 5 minutes left that the Islanders got a power play in the third period. And you're like, okay, here it comes, but they kill that off too. And then they'll push at the end. They didn't really get into the zone that much to be able to do something, so that this way the Flyers could get the puck and find a way to ice the game with the empty netter, Kevin Hayes again. And once the empty netter is scored and you're, where you are in the game, because by that point it was under a minute to go, you're like, okay, it is over. The streak is over. Because we started to question it. We were looking at some of the longest ones post lockout, because you're like, is it going to get here? And truth be told, we're going to shift as we shift to the rest of the week, and we get to this part of it where, yes, like it picked back up, because when they played Tampa, when they played New Jersey, Tampa just outmatched them. I mean, that entire second period was in the Flyer zone. It's the farthest away from my vantage point. So I literally, for people out there who want to get an idea of the way I looked during the second period, I watched the game like this, because the entire duration of play was down that end of the ice. It barely came in front of my eyes.
Right.
But first of all, within that game, and this has nothing to do with the Flyers, but I just want to call it out for the sake of calling it out. Pretty substantial moment NHL-wide in that game, because Steven Stamkos gets his 1,000th career point.
Yeah, Tampa. Yeah, congratulations to Steven Stamkos. I'm a little disappointed it wasn't a goal, just for kind of the number roundness of it all.
Well, I think you're
It-
disappointed. I think you're disappointed not that it wasn't a goal, but it's not. He didn't even get the primary, so it almost does. You don't. He doesn't make the direct play. If he makes
No.
like if he makes a pass on a 2-on-1 and the guy scores, and then it's like, hey, you set this guy up. Great job.
No, I'm weird, and I wish he had scored a goal because I wish he had 495 goals, 505 assists.
Oh,
I
okay.
wish they were just nice round numbers.
I got you.
But yeah, that game, just in general, was a very good Tampa Bay team
Right.
using a really poor team as a punching bag. That was them having fun.
Sure, and to echo what you were saying about Stamkos, by the way, because yes, congrats to him for 1,000, obviously, and to do it first of all in the number of games he's played because he's over a point per game for his career, but
he's
also
a freak.
But given the injuries, I mean, I guarantee you at some point in time there was a thought he wouldn't get here because the injuries sometimes were so debilitating.
Within the last 2 years.
Right, I think that
recently.
you had to at least consider the thought that listen, skill wise, of course he had the potential to get to 1,000 points, but I guess you were just wondering at some point in time would Father Time catch up to him, would the injuries catch up? He's not able to play.
There were people after he played one shift in the Stanley Cup final, and that's about it. There were people that thought that was it, and he was done. Forever.
No, he's still very much got it. He's still a dynamic player. It was really interesting because that was about the only mention of anybody in that grouping of typical core guys for Tampa, because the rest of the goal scoring and the rest of the whole, deal with that, Nick Paul has 2 goals, Corey Perry's picking up multiple points. Andre Vasilevsky's getting in it. Ian Cole had 2 points in the game. It's
Tampa Bay doing Tampa Bay stuff
to an extent, because and I say that because you're right, based off of the last 3 years, of course, this is what we're accustomed to. They're not, and maybe the last couple of games make this a little bit different because they have picked up wins in the last 2, obviously. But leading up to that point, they kind of weren't lighting the Eastern Conference on fire either, or the league standings on fire.
Kevin, you own the NHL video games from time to time, right?
Sure.
You ever go into the play now mode or the quick play mode and play as an NHL team against an AHL team just to feel better about yourself?
No, to do that, you just turn the skill level down to the easiest level, so you can run up the score 8-0.
But sometimes, for me at least, right, that's what this game felt like. Tampa Bay was playing the game on easy mode. That was a very good team. Sure. And they weren't playing at their top tier. Don't get me wrong. They were still kind of warming up. They played that game like a beer league game. They really did. They were trying stuff. They were having fun. They cracked one in the locker room after the game. Convince me.
I mean, I didn't see any evidence, but okay, because I do walk we walk by the room as we go to the coach's press conference, so I didn't see any evidence of that. But
fair enough. And what do you think about Saturday?
The Saturday game against New Jersey?
Yeah.
I'm not going to down the effort that they gave or the way that they played because, compared to what they had just done against Tampa Bay, this is, let's be real for a second. Tampa Bay may be the team that's made the Stanley Cup final for the last 3 years from the Eastern Conference, but the Devils are
the better team right now.
Right. They are not the class of the Eastern Conference at the moment because there are 4 teams with more points in the standings than they have right now. Carolina's doing better. Toronto's doing better. Boston's doing better. And the Devils are doing better. And the Devils came in, I put Eastern Conference. I mean, let's be real. Eastern Conference leading is only half the story. They're the best team in the NHL this morning.
Yeah. Yeah, it's insane to be where we're at.
I mean, okay. Best by depending on what you want to look at. They have the most points. They don't have the highest points percentage because Boston's played 2 fewer games, but both New Jersey and Boston have the same number of wins at this given moment, 20. They're the first 2 teams to 20 this year. It's one of the 2 best teams in the league this year. So whether you want to look at the points percentage, you want to look at the points total, they're one of the top 2.
The Devils have 5 losses this year, and one of them is to the Flyers. And quite frankly, almost a second one. The Flyers could have won that game last night.
Yeah, but you know what? For the good, even for, we sit there and we say, they don't ask how, they ask how many. Yeah. When you're a good team, if you find a way to win, You find
That's
a way
fair.
to win, and if it wasn't your best night, but you got the 2 points anyway, nobody cares. Like
That's fair.
I'm not like we analyze the Flyers the way that we do, because when it's bad and you don't
Oh yeah,
make it
no.
out of it, or you win ugly, it's like, well, you won ugly, but you're not changing. Like,
Good for Jersey. They got the 2 points.
right, and it doesn't change what their record is. To me, the more astonishing thing than them losing a game to the Flyers is they lost the home opener. They lost the season opener to the Flyers. They lost 2 nights later to Detroit.
Yep.
And since then are 22-1.
It's insane.
That is incredible in 22 games or 23
games.
Yeah,
That's
23
crazy.
to be 22-1
20
in the
wins,
standings.
2 loss, 1 overtime loss. Wow.
And let's be real for a second as we go, as I go into the actual kind of details of the game itself. I'll say this. First of all, the first period, classic Flyers Devils to an extent, and I say that meaning the Flyers weren't exactly getting the greatest scoring chances themselves. It was a lot of dump and chase, go after it, try to find your way through the neutral zone kind of stuff. The Flyers were doing it right back to the Devils, though, because the neutral zone was non-existent for the Devils. They really didn't come through with any momentum at all.
It felt like a game out of 2002.
Right, and they only took 4 shots.
Yeah.
So you're sitting there looking at that going, well, that's a pretty lopsided first period, at least from the shot totals.
Oh,
Jeez,
yeah. The Flyers, yeah.
And the thing about it is, like, the Flyers came out in the second period, and I believe at one point in time had the first 5 shots of the period, so it was 17-4.
So they mentioned,
and the very first shot the Devils get is off of a breakdown, and they score. Which is the story of the Flyers.
They mentioned on the broadcast that it had been 16 minutes since the last Devils shot.
Sure, which it's horrible for a goaltender, because you don't want to sit there for that long.
Ironically, I was flipping back and forth between the game and the UFC fights.
Okay.
And I turned on the game for the first time because I was getting done work. I turned on the game for the first time about 5 seconds before the Devils scored.
Okay, which is right off the breakdown by Ivan Provorov. Ivan Provorov had a really bad game.
Literally. So
that.
It was a bit of a scrum around the crease, and then the puck eventually got poked in. I turned the game on, and the puck was already in the crease. They were already battling for it in the crease. That's how bang it was.
No, it wasn't exactly like that.
Was it
the
not?
goal wasn't? No, because this was a quick around the end boards behind the net.
Oh, right.
Miles Wood was left alone, and then got it in front, and that's where Zetterlund was to score the goal. It was a really quick tic-tac-toe, but it was off of a mistake. Again, Provorov did not have a good game. He was pretty awful in this one.
Pretty bad.
But for your point about how good he looked on the power play, trying to move the puck against the Islanders, and for as good of a structure game as he probably had that night, this was not one of the better games. Now, granted, I will give the Flyers this. This is 6 minutes into the second period, and you're thinking, okay, here comes the opportunity. The Devils are in the lead. They answered quick on a power play. Right. Really quick. And so you got yourself back into one of these games. And given the way they were playing, you kind of, again, had that thought. It was very much the same thing as the Islanders game from a week earlier. Well, it's a tie game going to the third, and they're playing pretty well. Maybe.
Right, they got a shot. They're in it.
And granted, I'll get into this more, I guess, as we go into the whole outlook on this week into the season kind of thing. But if you're looking around, if you're the person who's sitting here saying, look, losses help the cause, you were looking around at the rest of the scoreboard that night and saying, please don't let this be the night that you find a way, because everybody else is doing things.
Right.
You had gotten, Anaheim had already played earlier in the day, got a point for going to a shootout. You had Chicago was winning a game. You had Ottawa and San Jose battling it out in what was at the time a close game.
Right.
It didn't turn out that way, but who cares? And you're sitting there going, okay, this is going to help. These are teams behind you that could win games tonight, and you're possibly doing the same thing. But they weren't playing. I guess when you look at it, Anaheim got a point against Minnesota. Has Minnesota been lighting the world on fire?
No.
Chicago beat the Rangers. The Rangers look lost right now.
Yeah.
So, let's put it this way. Unless they correct it within the next 2 weeks, are we going to be watching a Flyers-Rangers game in a couple weeks and saying the same thing where it's like, geez, just like when Chicago played them, they don't have it tonight. This team doesn't have it, and they're making the Flyers look good.
Teams have an uncanny way of snapping out of it against the Flyers.
Well, there is one other factor that I will tap into for that, because it goes off of last night. didn't realize that it was possible. Well, I'm sure it's always possible, but didn't realize or didn't expect, I guess, for this to be a de facto home game for the New Jersey Devils.
Oh, you didn't? Come on.
Not for the Devils. It typically
Really?
isn't. Typically, it isn't. I get they're better, but it typically isn't the
Right.
case. When the
So-
Rangers when the Rangers come to town in 2 weeks, it's going to be a home game for the New York Rangers.
Sure, and but okay. Here's the difference. There's not quite as many Devils fans.
Sure.
When
That's
the
why I
team-
didn't expect it.
Well, right. When the team is bad, it's not
There's
worth
really not.
It's not worth spending the money to come out to go watch, a team you don't like beat your favorite team on the road, blah blah blah. But now that the Devils are good, and again, this isn't like a bandwagon thing. This isn't good for you, Devils fans. Enjoy your time. But now that the team is good, you're going to get more Devils fans coming out of the woodwork. It is on a Saturday, so you're going to get more Devils fans willing to travel down. It's only, 90 minutes with traffic? It's not.
It was just a surprise. Like I knew already coming in. Like I don't think I expected it. Like as I drove down there, I wasn't expecting it. I got down there and I'm walking. No, I got down there and I was walking in and I'm like, okay, wow, there's actually a really decent amount of Devils jerseys walking in right now. I guess what I didn't expect was not for people to show up, but it was as vocal as I've ever heard a game against the Devils.
But sure, they have something to.
No, I know,
puff their
but
chest out about for the first time in a decade.
It just didn't seem like the typical game where you would see that much of a crowd come in because it's never been that way.
Right. Yeah, but as for the Rangers in a couple of weeks, yeah, every
The
time
Rangers-
the Rangers come to town, and New York is just so massive, and the Rangers have so much presence just all over.
Right, but the Rangers could be the team that's still in the mode of we sent the letter to our fans, we're building this thing back, it's going to take a while, blah blah blah, and that building would still have Rangers fans show.
Oh yeah, well yeah, and that's just a numbers thing,
right?
Like, that's just New York City.
Well, it's New York. It's like the Yankees. It's like
Yep.
if the Yankees are playing somewhere, even if they're terrible, people still go to see them because
people will fill a Buffalo Wild Wings in Des Moines, Iowa, to watch the New York Yankees beat up on the Tampa Bay Rays in March.
We just pulled that one out of nowhere, but
Yeah,
sure. A B-dubs in Des Moines, Iowa. Okay.
But tell me I'm wrong, though. That's how big an impact the New York Yankees are.
Sure.
And the Rangers are that. Like they're
one of the iconic brands. Yes.
Well, and that Forbes article that came out not terribly long ago with franchise values, it was a conversation around Arizona and the sale of the team and blah blah blah.
Sure.
The Rangers are the #1 franchise. It's not
Sure.
the Toronto Maple Leafs.
Well, because I think that there's a different
It's the
angle
American dollar. I know.
Sure. Well, that's part of it, but it's not going to be like to your point. It's not any of the other original 6 teams because it's New York and it's an
New York City.
iconic brand. Like,
and there's another team in town technically. That's the crazy part.
Technically.
Right.
Yeah, but even that team, you're going to tell me that team doesn't have value? They just built a brand new arena at a racetrack.
But that's what I'm saying is that's how big New York
casino.
is. That's what I'm saying. That's how big New York is. There's 3 teams within 35 minutes.
Well, okay. So, all right, fair enough.
And the Rangers are still that massive.
Okay, well, fair enough. I was surprised by that kind of vocal level of the Devils fans.
Fair enough.
Well, you know what, too? Okay, let's look at the 2 teams at the top of the standings. If this was Boston, I'd totally get it because Boston, I would see it and go, everybody's buying into that right away.
Oh,
Look,
yeah.
You're still playing for the team. There's an element of this where I sit there and go, this team is still very young. The New Jersey team is. They're still very young. This hasn't happened in a long time. I would actually almost believe it if there was more skeptics, like, even though it's a quarter of the way through, even though they're on this crazy 22-1 run.
The Devils are for real, man.
Oh, I'm not saying that they're not, but I could see fans for travel purposes being like, I'm still a skeptic.
I think they've watched.
It's been a long time. I mean, it's been since what would it be? I guess 2014 were they in the conference final?
Something like that. But I think they've watched a couple of years of Nico Hischier. I think they've watched a couple of years of Jack Hughes, and they know how good those guys are.
Thanks for the segue, because I was going to say the thing that was least surprising to me was Jack Hughes having a skill
absolutely.
moment.
Absolutely.
I had that planned from the moment I wrote the game preview.
Kid's incredible. But then you
great to see him.
You take a look at that, and then you combine it with the fact that their management has shown a willingness over the last couple of years to make kind of risky moves and go for it. You've seen them acquire PK Subban, and it didn't really work out. Well, I mean, it did for a little bit. You know what I mean?
Yeah, briefly, but yeah,
The
you're right.
PK Subban thing didn't match their timeline. If they picked
No.
up, if the PK Subban they traded for a couple of years ago, if they could get him today, he would fit them fantastically.
Yeah, possibly. I see your point there.
But at the time, it just wasn't. It wasn't the right time. But this team, like, they go out and they get John Marino. That's a big pickup. I don't think people are talking about it quite enough. Eric Howell is there. Jesper Bratt is finally kind of coming into his own and really blossoming as an NHL player.
Sure.
You go and get Tomas Tatar. Like, they've shown a willingness to go for it over the last couple of years, and it's finally all gelling. Like, this is the completion of the Devils rebuild. This is the young kids are finally, maturing into their own players and forming the core. And then the other guys are kind of the, not aging, but the veterans you're putting around them to bring in the experience, to bring in a little bit of grit. Mm-hmm. And they're really doing a solid job. I mean, if their goaltending situation stabilizes, and, we'll see where we're at on that as the season goes along, the Devils are a good team, and they're built to be a good team for a long time.
Well, because you also have to analyze, and I think your point on Jesper Bratt is a good one here because of the fact that someone who's been around for a little while to kind of go through the worst of it as well. Like I feel that way about Damon Severson or Miles Wood, guys like that who have been around for long enough that you're like, you were here when it was awful.
Oh yeah, you saw the dark days,
right? And like one of the other things about their team this year is every so often, and look, I'm mentioning this as a footnote because it's not really news. To go back to the Flyers for 1 second because it's not really news, but Ryan Ellis is out for the entire season officially.
Yeah.
But that brings back the conversation about that trade, right? And what an awful trade it was, blah, blah. Like, everybody complains about it and sits there and says that. And I still stand by, because I still stand by the fact that you would make it every single time based on its potential. And realistically, who's won? Because in the same week that Ellis is announced, in the same week that Ellis is announced that he's out for the entire year officially, not that anybody was surprised by that news. We already know Nolan Patrick's not playing this year.
Right.
His career might be over. His career might be over. Right. His career might be over. And Phil Myers got placed on waivers for what, the 5th time in the last 3 years?
Right, exactly. Like, what did you jettisoned?
Sometimes trades are lost on all sides, and there's no winner.
You jettisoned off a couple of high risk, high reward type of guys, and Phil Myers had a brief moment, and Nolan Patrick looked okay in his limited time with Vegas. Sure. But neither one set the world on fire. Neither one stuck.
Sure. So what's my point in bringing that up in the middle of a conversation about the New Jersey Devils? Sometimes two teams make a trade that works out perfectly for both sides.
Yep.
And I think you're seeing that with the two best teams in the league, 2 highest point totals, 2 teams with 20 wins, and one team sends Eric Haula to the New Jersey Devils, and the other one sends Pavel Zacha to the Boston Bruins, and it looks like it's just an even swap, 1-for-1.
The most beautiful change of scenery trade in a very long time.
But I've watched both teams play a game. Well, yeah, because I actually didn't really. I got to go off of this. I didn't really watch the season opener when the Flyers played the Devils because I was in another state in another time zone. I didn't get to watch it live. Now that I've watched the Flyers play the Devils this time around, and I've watched the Flyers play the Bruins in another game, I see how both guys fit into the equation, and it works naturally.
Pavel Zacha is a great Boston Bruin.
He's a better Boston Bruin than he ever I remember watching games where he was on the New Jersey Devils, and I go, "What kind of career is this guy even going to have?" This is a guy who got picked 1 pick ahead of Ivan Provorov.
Yep.
Which means, and I'm not trying to say that to make it seem like, oh, well, that means the Flyers so won better than anybody else ever did.
Right.
No, because the point is that if he got picked 1 pick ahead of Ivan Provorov, he also got picked ahead of Zach Werenski and Mikko Rantanen and Thomas Chabot and Matthew Barzal, and let's just keep going down the list of guys who he was not going to amount to be.
Yep. And
at least now I look at him on Boston and I say, I see your role. I see how you fit, and I see how you're working. Like it's to me, it's no different with him in Boston than Nick Foligno suddenly having a resurgence after being placed on waivers in the preseason.
Right.
Like all of a sudden, it's like, not that I'm surprised that the guy has a role in Boston. He always did from the moment he got there. but it was almost like I watched the preseason with him in lineup and went, the tank's running on empty. This is coming to an end soon. And all of a sudden, it's like they put him on waivers, and that was his trip to the gas station to get more fuel, and he's back. Like, he's back and playing well and doing things that help that team. But the same thing has happened because Eric Hall has never really been a bad player. He's been a solid depth player because he's played in multiple. Think about all the places he's played where he's had moments, like playing in Vegas, playing in, had a couple, playing in Boston, playing in Minnesota. Like, he's bounced around a lot and he's made it work a lot. But here it just seems like he seems like the right veteran piece at the right time for a team that is not led by guys like him. It's led by Jack Hughes and Nico Hischier and Jesper Bratt, and the list goes on. I mean, look at who else scores for them in this thing. Zetterlund was just told the other day, I saw, this was, I believe, the Devils website had a whole thing on this. Zetterlund was just told the other day, move out of the hotel, get a place.
Nice.
You're staying. And I believe the same. I'm trying to remember who else the other one was because I want to make sure. I don't want to make it seem like I'm getting it wrong. I think it was Boquist who was told. Jesper Boquist was told to get a place as well. So not who I was going to say next, but the game-winning goal, or not game-winning goal, the goal that puts him ahead for good off of a miscommunication behind the net. So it's kind of cheap. But Dawson Mercer, another piece of the future that's factoring in.
Eric Howla, by the way.
Mm-hmm.
Drafted in 2009.
Okay.
7th round pick.
Yep.
Number 182 overall to the Minnesota Wild. Wow.
And a career at this point that because I've thought about his big chunks where he's played the most time. You forget that for a little while after the couple years in Vegas, and the 1 year in Vegas, by the way, career year, 29 goals, 55 points.
Everybody in Vegas had a career year.
But after playing in Minnesota, where the best that he had was 15 goals and 34 points, to double your goal total.
He's done a little team hopping since then, though.
Well, right. Carolina, a little stop in Florida, Nashville, Boston. The year in Boston did him well.
Yeah.
He wasn't the most natural fit there because they couldn't figure out a good place to put him because, I mean, hell, they couldn't even figure out whether or not they wanted to play him on the wing or down the middle at times because they'd have a guy get hurt and they'd have to play him down the middle, and then he would go back to the wing, and it would be a mess like that.
He couldn't get into a rhythm.
Oh, and do you know what else kind of factored into an extent with him last year in Boston that I don't think, let's just hypothetically speaking, what if the trade was never made and he's still in Boston?
Okay.
I think he'd still be doing okay because I think one of the big reasons why he had the year that he did production-wise, but the fit never seemed right, was because of Jake DeBrusk, who wanted out while everything was going on there last year. Right. And so they kept bumping him around. Like, he couldn't get along with Bruce Cassidy and the coaching staff. He couldn't, they didn't see a vision for him. Like, he didn't see their vision. They're bumping him to fourth line, sometimes thinking he's going to be out of the lineup practically. And so what do you have to do? You vault other guys ahead. So a guy like that all of a sudden is playing, and all it takes is a Charlie Coyle to be out, or pick another guy.
God forbid anybody in the top 6 gets hurt,
Well, exactly. I mean, and here's the other thing. You're still making up for the fact that David Krejci's not playing with you at that point. So, isn't it amazing what happens when he shows back up and all of a sudden you go, boy, slots right back into that 2C role.
Yep.
Just like old times. And oh, by the way, now the guy on your wing is Taylor Hall.
Yeah. And now that we're on Boston, by the way, because we've gotten to Boston here, can we talk about the fact that I'm just very interested in every Boston home game now? They're still undefeated at home.
Right, sure.
They have not lost a game in TD Garden this year. I think it's 14 now, 13, 14, something like that. It's
was
absurd.
Carolina was when they got to 12, which I think set a record. So now they're up to 14 with the win against Tampa and the win against Colorado.
And they're just running it up at this point. And you're getting close. You are a significant portion of the way through your entire home schedule.
Well, if you're through 14, yeah.
That's what I'm saying.
We're bordering on half.
That's what I'm saying.
Do you want to know what's even scarier than that?
Okay.
They have a 5-game homestand for 2 weeks. No, which means
who do they got?
Well, let's start with this. They play on Monday night against Vegas at home to keep it going. So if they were to win that,
game. Okay.
It is a tough game. Well, you know what? It is. But they just made convincing work out of Colorado, and they do it against Tampa.
But it's
And
still a tough game.
I'm not saying it's not tough, but they've done. I'm saying they've played some tough teams and still made it work. No, actually, you're gonna think that the 5-gamer is pretty favorable.
Islanders, Kings, Blue Jackets,
Columbus,
Panthers,
Florida, Winnipeg.
Jets. Man,
Florida. There's at least 2, maybe 3 on that list that I see are easy. Or should be easier wins.
Oh, yeah.
But the only thing that I don't factor in there, like, pick one of the 2 between the Islanders and the Kings that should be tougher because someone will play them tough.
The Kings will play a tough game.
They should.
Yeah.
Columbus, they should have. Winnipeg's the other one, by the way, because Hellebuck's playing out of this world. If anybody's going to go in and steal a game, goaltending. I mean, you know what? Maybe that makes some of the other ones tougher, though, too, because the Islanders have been getting some good goaltending. Sorokin's played well. Florida can get, especially if they continue to roll with Spencer Knight, has been getting some goaltending that can play in. Definitely Winnipeg's goaltending, but we'll see. I mean, and guess what? I mean, okay, so factor that in. Vegas, then that 5-game stretch, and Buffalo is on New Year's Eve. Could they possibly go into
the year?
Well, and think about something. They're the home team on January 2nd for the Winter Classic, which counts as a home game, but we could sit there and still say
they haven't lost in the Garden.
Haven't lost in the Garden.
Oh my God. Oh my God. That would be the funniest headline. Okay.
Well, that is fascinating, by the way. So let's
one more league story, and then we'll get back to the Flyers.
Because we got to get into the heart of the matter at the Flyers, which is way more than just the games.
But real quick, I just want to briefly mention the Edmonton Oilers have played 25 games this year.
Yeah.
Do you know off the top of your head how many points Connor McDavid has?
Oh, good. I'm looking at the standings, not player performance. Good.
Okay.
Good. I'm not spoiling this.
Do you know how many points Connor McDavid has?
In 25 games?
25 games.
Well, let's see. Last night they won 5-3.
Uh-huh.
He scored the last goal. I know he probably
had
at least
4 points.
he had at least 1 or 2 more assists off.
He had 2 assists, 2 goals. He had a 4-point night casually.
So then, fine. If he had 4 points last night in game 25, he's at 52.
He's at 47.
Really? Okay. I thought he got over the 2 per game mark with that.
Not quite. He has 21 goals, 26 assists in 25 games. He's got more than an assist per game and also 21 goals.
Okay, fine. Then if you're gonna go there, which it is absurd. If you're gonna go there, then I'm going with one more league story then because we needed. Yeah. I think it needs to be mentioned. If you're bringing up McDavid, it needs to be mentioned. It needs to be mentioned.
Okay.
You just mentioned how many points does he have in 25 games? Okay. Is he leading the league in goals?
He's not.
We need to talk about this guy.
Jason Robertson's ridiculous.
By the way, 1 fewer game than McDavid, and he has 22 to Connor McDavid's 21. Kid is special.
Kid is ridiculous. And Dallas and 32 Thoughts talked about this. Dangle Podcast talked about this. Like, this is a conversation that's been around a little bit recently.
Mm-hmm.
The Dallas Stars are pulling off the most seamless transition I've ever seen. Like, they have they have successfully transitioned from the Tyler Seguin, Jamie Benn, Ben Bishop era
to have a goaltender, a scoring forward,
to the Rope Hintz, Jason Robertson, Jake Ottinger era.
You know what the scary part of what you just said is?
I didn't even mention Miro Heiskanen.
Thank you. That was where I was going.
Yeah, like
didn't even mention they got a cornerstone defenseman while you're at it.
Hello, and everyone's Swedish. Esa Lindell is really good. Joel Kiviranta is there. Like, they also just have a bunch of Swedes, and that's pretty cool too. One of these days, Oscar Lindblom will play there.
That'd be nice.
That'd be pretty cool.
Be a lot better than San Jose. Because if nothing else, he deserves a chance to go to play for somebody who can win. But besides, but no, I mean, you know what? Well, like you just said, well, maybe the more astonishing thing or the thing that makes it even better is they're doing it while those guys you mentioned, well, not
on
Ben
the fly,
but right, they're doing it while Ben and Seguin are still part of the equation. Yep. Like that's a team that's still successful. I want to see something really quick about them.
By the way, if you are listening to this show and you know me from any of our sim leagues or any of our various fantasy hockey leagues,
Dude loves Rope Hintz.
you will know that I am the world's biggest Rope Hintz fan. So to see Jason Robertson leading the league in goals when Rope Hintz is his primary center and has a whole pile of assists this year.
Speaking of which, by the way, fresh off a new contract,
Signed a big fat contract, 8 years, 8.45 per.
Guess what? With the way the cap's going to be, it's a good deal.
It's an incredible deal.
It's a good deal.
It's a great deal for the player because the player gets paid while the cap is still a little bit tight. And then once the cap blows up in a couple of years, the team is going to love having a first-line center for under $8.5 million. Are you kidding me?
Well, and the other thing that you got to factor in is exactly what you're talking about, because once that deal kicks in, he's jumping from just over $3 million to $8.5, right?
All right, and listen, you're giving me an opportunity to talk about Rope Hintz, so I'm talking about Rope Hintz.
No, that's fine, but I'm saying, think about for a second. I mean, it's going to look a little ugly in the beginning because like Sagan's still got a lot of term left. Ben's only got 2 years after this year. Like, he almost becomes the natural replacement for Jamie Benn.
Absolutely.
And let's say you might be able to maximize what Sagan's given you over the next few years, for all I know. Like, even Robertson's locked up for 3 more years beyond this year at $7.75 million. That's obscene, given what he's doing this year.
So, real quick, can I tell the story of why Rope Hintz is kind of a meme in my life?
Do.
Okay.
Please do.
So, a couple years ago, I was in a sim hockey league. Shout out DCHL. Shout out Matt. Anyway, so I was in this sim league a couple years ago, and I had Rope Hintz. And I got Rope Hintz for a steal. I loved it. It was Olli Jokinen and a Jokinen and a 5th round pick.
I haven't heard that name in a minute. So
for Rope Hintz, another prospect that I don't remember, and a 5th round pick or a 4th round pick.
Okay.
So it was a pretty good little deal for me, considering Olli Jokinen was expiring, and like I thought it was fantastic.
Sure.
So anyway, I'm sorry. I'm trying to find. Okay. There was a guy in the league, and I'm not going to name him, but he ran the Dallas Stars, because how this sim league works is everyone is assigned to a team, and you run your team. And he was a Dallas Stars fan in real life. Or he picked up the Dallas Stars as a team in real life because he ran the Dallas Stars in this sim league. And he was interested in acquiring Rope Hintz because he was on his way up. He was starting to kind of do things at the NHL level. He was starting to kind of prove himself as a player. Now, I had an attachment to him because I got him as a prospect, and now he's starting to prove himself. So I feel really good about that.
So when you're playing armchair GM and you essentially acquire the prospect, you're like sitting here going, I like this kid. I want him around. I'm enjoying this. And it's like, even though it's a sim league, it's still,
I'm puffing my chest out. Puffing my chest out because I acquired a prospect that is hitting, currently in the prospect of blowing up and hitting and becoming a thing. And this guy messages me, and he's talking about acquiring Rope Hintz, and he's trying to underplay it and go, well, Jason Robertson's the center of the future. Or no, it wasn't Jason Robertson it was I can't
Is it somebody who's playing now?
Yeah.
It is? Okay, hang on. I'm pulling back up their roster really quick.
While I do this. So he was talking about
wasn't Foxa, was it?
No. I think it's somebody they traded away. Ty Smith? Did they have Ty Smith?
Oh, what, Ty Dellandrea?
Oh, Ty Dellandrea. That's who it is. He's like, Ty Dellandrea is the 1C of the future. Rope is never going to be more than a 2C. You know, I'm not going to, because I think he's going to be a star. And I think, I'm trying to get first line value for him. So he says, this is a direct quote from a message. And again, I'm not naming names here, so I feel okay about that. I'm willing to consider a combo involving guys like Veleno, Reese, Nick Robertson, Jake Virtanen, Galvis, Lucas Johnson in a deal for Hintz plus a guy like Vesalainen or Adam Bachvest.
Okay, so hold on a minute, because there's a bunch of names thrown in there all at once.
Right, and I'm not going to break down who Jameson Reese is, and we're not talking about Jake Virtanen. Right. He's dead to everybody here.
No, but because the Nick Robertson part was interesting because he's kind of in limbo in Toronto right now.
So for context, this is a couple of years ago, right after all those guys just are coming off a good performance at World Juniors.
Okay.
They're all post-draft, pre-NHL. Like, they're all post-grads. And he just throws me this pile of prospects, basically, for a guy who is in the process of proving himself. And at one point, he very snarkily throws out, well, what do you even think Rope Hintz is, anyway? And I went, like, as in, like, what do you project him to be? And I was pretty conservative, to be honest. I was like, oh, I don't know. Like, I'm pretty excited about him, but I think he's like a 20, 40, 60 guy. And for the record, just in terms of feeling vindicated, last year, Rope Hintz finished with 37 goals and 35 assists, and is currently on pace for 28 goals and 63 assists. So, bite me. Anyway,
okay, there you go. Hey, listen. If we're going off of the Dallas Stars thing here for a second, because I play fantasy hockey, and my number one goaltender this year in the draft that I took anywhere, that I kind of share the team with my dad a little bit. So, but he kind of knowing how many games I'm at, he goes, okay, who's good, who's not, kind of like
right.
help me with these depth picks here.
Help me out.
But he so when we came to goalies, there was a run of goalies by the third round, as typically is in fantasy, and I just went off of last year's playoffs and said, you know what, Ottinger might be the best one left. Let's go for it. And turns out the guy's ranked in the top 100 of players this year, and if not for a couple of games and he missed with an injury, might be the number one goalie in the league this year.
I believe Jake Ottinger got kept in my league because of how his performance in the playoffs was.
And for what it's worth, by the way, Ottinger was the first goalie we took. The second goalie we took was Ilya Samsonov.
Nice.
The third goalie we took was Linus Ullmark.
Nice. You're feeling good.
Sometimes you just gotta have a feel. But also, by the way, to your point, because it's such a deep league, this is for clarity. By the way, this is a league with 18 teams in it. Yeah. So you really got to know depth.
So that's like goaltending, right there.
But you're picking backup goalies. You're picking third pairing defensemen sometimes just to get guys who
get bodies who play.
So 14th round, we picked Esa Lindell.
Ooh.
Who turns out to be a pretty nice player so far. I mean, like, we got a few good ones here. I mean, 19th round, I got a guy like Adam Lowry from Winnipeg, who doesn't light up the score sheet any, but does a bunch of other little things that get you fantasy points, like hits people, blocks shots, plays penalty kill, wins faceoffs.
I have Radko Gudas on my team, or had Radko Gudas on my team for the same reason, and I currently have Nikita Zadorov on my team for the same reason.
But like, doesn't that make this better though? When you have to know what you're taught, like know that those aspects of a player just as much. Like, this isn't about just going out and going, oh gee, who's going to score the most goals this year?
Sort by scoring and get the top guy available. Right.
I mean, look, do you try to? Of course you do. But everybody knows who the top 10 goal scorers are. And to be honest, you know what I really want to do right this second with that to an extent?
Oh no.
Because now I'm curious, because this is not going to happen next year at this rate. When did Robertson go this year? Because like this year, like Kirill Kaprizov went top 5 this year because everybody now knows that's the thing. Like that he's going to be that kind of player. So I want to see when Robertson went, because like just for clarity here, as a guy who is not necessarily lighting the world on fire, but by now has a reputation that he's a good skill player. Let's just say this.
We all knew that he was going to have a good year.
Oh, I'm not talking about Robertson. I'm talking about a guy that I got.
Oh, okay.
That I got late, by my standards, late. That everybody knows he's a good player. I got Braden Point in round 7 of an 18-team league. Like, I got Braden Point with...
That's disrespectful.
You're telling me. If Braden Point was round 7 for me, I got him at pick 124.
All right.
That's obscene.
Tell me the truth.
Rope Hintz went 120 for you, by the way.
Nice. And how many guys messaged you after going, hey, nice pick?
Not really. It was
really? Okay.
There was not near as much. Jason Robertson went 50th in round 3.
Wow. So people knew.
To an extent, but to give you an idea of some players that are ahead of him that maybe haven't performed well. Well, it's tough to say. A lot of these guys have performed well.
Where'd Zach Hyman go?
Pretty early, probably. I'm gonna guess. I'm scrolling through, but I'm gonna guess round 5.
Well, because I was curious, because you see high-end players go, and then often you will see one of their line mates go shortly after. So you see Connor McDavid. You know, Zach Hyman's getting drafted at some point fairly soon.
Zach Hyman went 11 picks before the Braden Point pick at 113.
Nice. Yep. Wow, that's good value there.
And to put a bow on the Dallas Stars thing, the pick after the Braden Point pick that we made at 124, Miro Heiskanen at 125. Can you believe that that's how far?
Wow. Yeah. that's crazy. Okay.
All right. We're an hour in and we still haven't talked about we talked about the games this week, but we haven't talked about. First of all, I'm surprised you have yet to ask me in the first hour, especially when you brought up the New Jersey game, about post.
Hey, so yeah, have you had any interesting press conferences this week, Kevin? Any interesting post-game experiences?
Okay, well, one interesting post-game experience of note, obviously, but interesting press conferences. I wasn't necessarily at them, but you know,
have you heard anything from the media about maybe some
well, we started talking
notable events this week?
Well, we started talking about this last week, right? Because we talked about you watch the game, you write it kind of thing and all that type of stuff. And I told you last week, get ready because the fuse is lit.
Yep. It was our show title.
It was, it's starting to get to a point, and it's lit for a bunch of reasons. It's lit for, it's very clear that the ire towards management, it's very clear, all that type of stuff. And, granted, we're not here today talking about any change to that part of the team right this second.
No, I didn't come in with balloons and streamers. So
yeah, but I'll elaborate on that in a little bit, by the way. But nonetheless, we're not talking about that today. And the longer that it goes on, like, to an extent, look, you can look at that particular 57-second press conference, and like the banner says, it's torts being torts. Listen, he can sit there and say you're asking dumb questions. Every pundit on Twitter who thinks that they could do a better job than anybody who's in there can sit there and say, yeah, they were dumb questions. Here's the reality of those situations, because it's happened. First of all, if you didn't expect that to happen at any point in time, you don't know anything about John Tortorella, then you've lived under a rock for his entire coaching career.
I would also like to mention going forward that if you don't expect this to happen again, you're also living under a rock. Like, this will happen again. This was not the last time.
Like, there's a, and I've said this, there's a method behind the madness with the way he presents himself. He's not as honest and forthright as he is as a head coach. He knows how to craft an answer.
Yep.
Sometimes that crafted answer is very carefully worded and detailed and says a lot. Sometimes it's not a lot of words. It's not even an answer. It's I want the hell out of here.
But it's certainly a message.
Answer. Right. Like, he walked into that room and you could have had the best question in the world, and I don't think he was answering it last night. He had a plan going in that basically the bottom, and I'll tell you what the plan was. They just outshot the New Jersey Devils 33-18 in a game that they lost 3-2. Goaltender made a key mistake that led to a goal. Yep. The same goaltender that carried you to 7 wins to start the year.
Yep.
He's not throwing the goaltender under the bus for that.
Absolutely not.
So he's not going to talk about that. He's not going to talk about a team that just played with so much structure against the best team in the league, one of the two.
You could argue that they outplayed the New Jersey Devils.
Right. He's not going to bury a team like that clearly doesn't have the same level of talent and yet hung in there with them for the same 60 minutes. That was right there at the end. In fact, thought they scored a tying goal to have it waved off for incidental contact.
Oof. Yeah, and it should have been. Like, it was interference. But we're not arguing about that, but it is unfortunate that, you get that goal, you get that puck across the goal line, and it just doesn't count. Anytime that happens, you're disappointed.
Yeah. So he's not doing that. So what is he doing? And what question would you like the rest of the media to ask that isn't kind of a softball layup to him? Because at this point in time, when you've lost 12 out of 13, and this is a daily routine of post-game, talk about the loss.
Hey, John, how does it feel to lose? It sucks. Hey, John, how does it feel to lose? Again. It sucks. Like, I mean, how long can you do that?
But it's not even that.
Right.
What else are you going to try to pull from the guy if he's not going to, like, let's put it this way. Think about the timeline that leads up to this moment. He says he's not going to talk about individual players. He's always don't ask me about an individual player. I got to watch the tape first.
Yep.
Well, then after a game, you have nothing to ask him about except for, what did you think of the effort? How did you do this? Blah, blah, blah. What will, like, if he doesn't want to give answers, he doesn't have to give answers. And I don't think he's going to be satisfied with anything until there's a change, because that's where he's headed with this. I don't want to hear anybody complain about this guy at this point.
No, absolutely not.
Because to be honest with you, whether you think he's the right coach for today or not, it doesn't matter at this point. The fans should be in love with this guy, because whether he's the right coach for today or not, whether you like his style or you don't, whether you think it aligns with the state of the franchise, you need somebody out there right now to tell it to you like it is and be this forthright and honest. And the same day that the GM came out, and an hour later from this coach telling you a whole list of things, the general manager an hour later tells you, well, we're only 5 points out of a wild card spot,
Which sounds like a desperate man clinging on to his job.
Because, okay, look, that's a human reaction.
Totally, and I'm not giving Chuck Fletcher a hard time for that. He is up against the wall.
Right, if you or I had to go out, not that we're ever, you and I are not interviewed about our jobs on a daily basis, right?
It feels like it sometimes.
Doing the show, it does, sure.
Well, doing sales, it does.
Oh, well, that's true. You're in a different boat than I am. I don't have to communicate with people like that.
Be nice to your salespeople this holiday season. They're
working
very hard. Not you, just in general.
No. Believe me, when my wife had the flu in the week leading up to Thanksgiving, and the many trips I went over to the pharmacy and had to wait 30 minutes for something because it's just hectic.
Yep.
You just look. Am I frustrated? Yes.
Tis the season.
Do I sit there at the end of the day and try to make it seem like, listen, I know it's not your fault. I am frustrated, but it's not your fault. Thank you. Yep. Just be polite about it. You don't have to be thrilled, but you don't have to be an ass.
Doing their job.
Right.
Yes.
You don't have to be an ass.
Right. Speaking of asses, Chuck Fletcher.
But my point being, if you had to answer questions about your job status every day, and it's not going well, wouldn't you try to spin yourself off as, listen, I'm trying to do the best. I'm trying to do my best, or you try to find the positive, because at the end of the day, you don't want to lose your job. No. Now, granted, this is different circumstances. This is the general manager in the National Hockey League who has who has a 7-figure salary.
Yeah,
not the average everyday person who's sitting there going, geez, you know what? For my $40,000 a year annual salary, I can't afford to lose that, or I don't have a place to live.
Right. Who, all things considered, will be literally fine if he gets fired. Might have his feelings hurt. Might take a financial hit.
Right. Did you ever notice
generally speaking, will be fine.
Because did you ever notice how in sports, nobody ever sits there and nobody ever argues with it's the business of it. Yeah, it's the business of it, and you're still getting paid if they fire you.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Because you signed a contract. Anybody else gets fired, they get shown the door and they don't get their last paycheck.
No.
Or something like that. Maybe they do. You know what I mean?
Maybe you get your vacation time paid out.
Right. That's what I mean. Anyway. John Tortorella came out the other day and tells everybody this is not a 1-year thing. It's more than that. And he's right.
He knows.
Because the press conferences lately from him, and listen, they're not after a game. You've got to separate the post game from the day after I have
practice interviews. Right.
Because at the end of the day, if you're passionate about a sport, if we watch a sports team that we have expectations for, right now, when we watch this team, it's a little bit indifferent, right? The losing isn't okay. No,
like I said, okay. I was flipping back and forth between the UFC fights and the game.
Right. And my point
when
being,
the Flyers are good, I don't flip back and forth. I watch the Flyers.
But my point being, when they're not good, the losing's okay because you're trying to get draft picks or a better draft pick. People are going to sit there and tell you nobody cares about it. People are going to sit there and say it doesn't matter, and I have to ignore that stuff because I'm there to work. I'm there to do something. And I'm not going to stop doing that just because the team is awful. I have to be there for that. But it's, when it's as much as you can sit there and say all of that stuff and it doesn't matter, he's still locked into a game wanting to win. And as fans, if we're watching a team that we have higher expectations for, when, we're recording on Sunday morning like we always do, when we go watch the Eagles later this afternoon, if they don't win the game with the record that they have and the potential that they have, and they do something that frustrates us, we're pissed off about it. And if they lose this game, don't talk to us for an hour. Don't talk to us for the rest of the day. That's how Philadelphia is, right? Don't talk to me for the rest of the day. The team lost, and I'm pissed off about it. And he can't walk in. They give you a 10-minute cool down period after these types of things. 10 minutes is not enough for John Tortorella to cool down.
To be fair, by the time the Flyers lost, I've already processed it midway through the second period.
Right, but that's what I'm talking about.
I know.
He's the head coach of the team.
He right. John Tortorella is 110% into
but when we were but this goes back to when we were watching the World Series, or when you're watching the Eagles now, and you're watching a team that has expectations that you say every week or every day or whatever it is, I'm investing myself into this. Well, he's invested into it, obviously. He's the
Sure.
head coach of the team. So when he's investing the time and the work and that we're going to keep showing him the same clips and we're going to keep teaching him the same things and we're going to keep driving this home until we get it right. And if he's investing the time and they're not winning the game, but the effort's there and the structure was there and they played better, but he's going to get asked a question about, well, did you think the effort was there? Like, yeah, the effort was there. We played our asses off.
And John Tortorella has already shown that if the guys play hard, he's not going to bury them.
Because he can't.
Right.
Because he knows that, and he's known for a while.
He's the only thing shielding them from this team.
Because he's known for a while that the talent gap is so massive that there's only so much you can do with it. He can't just be forthright and come out. Like, you can't exactly go out there and say, you know what? The reason that we keep losing games is because we suck. We're not a good enough team. Like, this is a trash roster.
But they're trash that plays hard. Like, you can't
we
say
play
that.
hard. Yeah, but you know why he can't say that? Because every player in the room would sit there and go, gee, he thinks we suck.
F this guy, right.
Right.
And
he's trying to sit there and say, listen, they're doing the best they can. They're trying. We're teaching them as much as we can. I'm trying to make the best out of this.
The Philadelphia Flyers organization is currently a hurricane.
Sure.
And John Tortorella is standing in, well, he's standing in front of the shack, right? The players are all crowded in the shack. And John Tortorella is standing in front of it trying to hold the door shut.
He's
trying to protect these guys.
He's putting up windows protecting the inside of your general store.
And to be honest,
losing all of its inventory.
To be honest, from my perspective as somebody who's not in the room, who's not even in the post-game press conferences,
sure.
like as somebody just who kind of watches him on YouTube afterward, he's doing a great job with what he has.
He's doing as well of a job as you can ask for because to come out and he's almost fearless in this, in the sense that in the sense that to say what he's saying. That to go where no head coach in the last 20 years has gone, to go where the general manager will not go, to go where the ownership will not go, to tell you this is not 1 year. To tell you the reason that we don't get respect, the reason that there's no respect is because you have to eat it before you can earn it.
Yep.
Like right now, you take notes. People don't respect you. There's things that maybe what he's talking about is not what we do. He's talking about what players are saying, passing the bench.
Right.
That could be what it is too. And you remember that stuff. The officials, you sometimes don't get a call because you're not respected. Yep. You earn it. And then he's right about that. And then he's telling you there's a right way to build it. And basically, without saying the words, he didn't say rebuild. He didn't say bottom out. He didn't use that language because he said, I'm not. Because he said, I'm not the language.
I'm willing to bet he doesn't have permission to say the word rebuild.
Oh, he doesn't. Which comes back to think about the setting for this press conference that he had where he said all this. It's not a game day. It's calculated. He can think about it. He's not coming in a bad mood because of it. It's calculated.
Not because of that.
Well, but it's calculated. And his answer is, without saying the word rebuild, without saying bottom out, he did use other words that I think are telling. That he used other words that, to me, my jaw was on the floor because I'm sitting there going, wow, just went there. No more Band-Aid. Called out the Band-Aid approach, called out the gimmicks, called out all that stuff, and said, you want to know what wins people over and gets people back? Winning. You want to win? You got to build it the right way. That's how we're going to do it. And he basically flat out just told you the only way to do this is to do it the way it's happening right now. It's not going to look pretty. It's going to suck for several years, but you got to get to that point in order to win people back.
And it's as close as you're going to get to Stone Cold Steve Austin talking about Vince McMahon, right? Because he's not going to come out and just rip Vince McMahon, blah, 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 blah. He's not going to come out and do that. He's not going to come out here and fry Chuck Fletcher in the media and, go visit him at the hospital and hit him over the head with a bedpan. Like, that's not going to happen.
Sort of. Okay.
Yeah, I'd be okay, but not as directly. That's what I'm saying.
He can't sit there and say, all right, let's go into.
I'm sure he wants to. I would love to get John Tortorella in a shady little bar in Haddonfield and ask him what he really knows.
He's already done it, and I'll tell you why.
Okay.
Because let's dive into it first. what John Tortorella said earlier in the week in that regard, without saying the word rebuild and saying it's more than 1 year and you got to build it the right way and there's only one way to do it kind of stuff. It makes it such, especially when this was right before Chuck Fletcher was supposed to speak and primarily address injuries, but then also throw in the we're 5 points out message, which, by the way, is now literally later that night went to 6. But it makes it such that you can honestly sit there, and especially me, from being the person who actually puts out the story that you would then read to get this information, other than watching the video of anything that was said, right?
Right.
It makes it such that you honestly sit there and you go, screw it. Why should anybody have to hear from Dave Scott or Chuck Fletcher or anybody else if they're going to just spin the narrative as we're only this far out of a playoff spot, that, or whatever the case may be, or just spin a narrative that doesn't make sense. Everybody thinks that, and this goes back to the dumb question thing a little bit too, because everybody thinks that these guys are lobbed softballs by the media and blah, blah, blah. There's a right way to ask questions like this to get the answers you want. And most times when you ask these questions, if you don't ask it the right way, they can spin it however they want back to you, no matter how off base it might seem. So unless Dave Scott is coming to you with an announcement, I'm retiring, we're selling, something like that. Unless he's coming to you, what do you need him to speak for? Stay the hell away. Yep. What's the point of what you have to say?
Stay home, count your money.
Because you won't hear like the words that are going to be said about this might like, yeah, we're not good enough. We're not this, right? Blah, blah. Those words don't change anything.
No.
And people don't want to hear your words. The same goes for Chuck Fletcher. Words are meaningless. So in fairness to John Tortorella, who is not only saying all the right things and not being shy about it, but also like there's nothing more than John Tortorella can do.
Right. He's not constructing the roster.
Right. He's working with nothing. He's got a preseason roster most nights with the injuries. He's playing young players who are at this point probably well above their means. He's got veteran players who are playing well over the amount of minutes that they probably should or typically would. There's nothing more that he can do with the product on the ice than what he's trying to do. He's not the builder. The general manager is. And ownership is to an extent because ownership gets the people in who do build it. And Tortorella's job at this point is building the culture within the room. So to that point, he's doing as well as he can given the circumstances. One, considering the lack of direction from everybody else in the organization, considering that he can't do it alone, he's doing as well as he can. And like at this, like you want to find out, like how many times has he said, you want to find out who's with you and who's not with you as you move forward, who's going to be part of this in 2, 3, 4 years and who's not.
Right.
Doesn't sound like the team's GM or even the ownership is with you at this point.
No.
And that's a huge problem. Like when you listen to Chuck Fletcher and listen, there's nothing wrong with Chuck Fletcher or any general manager thinking about winning as the goal.
Sure.
That's what you're there for. There's nothing wrong with that. It's what
they're all thinking about winning as the goal.
Well, because it's what you play sports for. It's what we watch them for. How many people, like you think about how many people don't care about this team right now, and it doesn't necessarily have to do with it doesn't have to necessarily do with, well, the team stinks. It's from the deeper roots of the issues, right? Like this has nothing. Like people aren't sitting here saying I'm not interested.
People understand that this roster isn't built to win hockey games right now.
Right. If Chuck Fletcher wants to have the mindset going into each season that something can be different, that the team should be able to succeed, that that's the point of his job. You build the team that you think you're supposed to think
that
they can be different.
That is your general manager's role.
Right. Like that's. I'm just trying to say that the role of a general manager is to be in a position to say those things. That's what you want to do. And he should think that way to an extent. But you have to have an understanding of what you are versus what the rest of the league is. You have to stop trying to pass off the abstract painting where you read between the lines and see one thing and everybody else sees something else. Right. You have to try to pass off the interpretive nature of, hey, the abstract painting is the Mona Lisa right now. You know what I mean? Like you see a masterpiece, you see a team that you think can still compete, and everybody else sees scribbles on a piece of paper.
And there may be some small markets where that kind of thing flies because people don't really, pay enough attention to the hockey team, quite frankly. And I'm not going to name any specifics here. But Philadelphia is not a small hockey
Right.
market. I know there's talk about, 20,000 fans and they're all in the building, whatever. But
Right.
that's just not true.
And tying it all back to the beginning, kind of where we started with the first game, these players are not good enough to compete with the likes of Tampa Bay, and Colorado's coming up, and they lost at Boston, and Vegas is coming up, right? All that, or anybody like that, any team in that class.
If they find a way to lose to Arizona next Sunday, they could very easily be 2 losses on their way to another 10-game losing streak already.
We'll see about that, but we'll get to that. But when I say that they're not on that level, that's not meant to be a knock on the players who are, like on the players themselves as human beings. Zach McEwen seems like a great guy, but he's not getting you to where you want to go.
No.
Nick Delorier seems like a great guy, not getting you to where you want to go.
Well, he better be for the next 4 years.
Well, hang on a second, because I'm not dismissing him as a player on a roster. High-end talent gets you where you want to go, and guess what? You can have a Zach McEwen or a Nick Delorier on your roster and still be a contender. Tampa Bay has won Stanley Cups with Pat Maroon on the roster.
Yeah.
The Islanders were a win away from being in the Stanley Cup with Matt Martin on the roster. There's roles for guys like that, but it becomes the last role we talk about after the skill, after the two-way ability, after the forechecking, after the scoring, after the defensive depth, after the goaltending. Chuck Fletcher's biggest problem isn't the intention of being successful. Every team should intend to do that.
Right.
And certainly the product of the franchise, he should intend, it's what every GM should intend to do, and certainly a product of the franchise that seemingly hasn't known darker times than these. The intention has always been put the best roster on the ice, right? It's never been anything different. But it's having the same vantage point that I do for a game and watching every game like the fans out there do too. Especially the ones that are still doing it and crazy enough to do it, that they can't separate themselves from this on a daily basis. And I get it.
Right. We're here doing this show weekly.
Right. Chuck Fletcher's problem lies in getting to the quarter mark of a season, snapping out of a 10-game losing streak, being a handful of results away from being at the bottom of the league standings, and somehow coming back to, we're only 5 points out of the wild card.
Right.
Stop focusing on making the playoffs every year like that's the crown jewel of the game. Stop trying to make that an acceptable marker for a successful season. Nobody wants to watch you get into the playoffs by 2 points to get bounced in 5 games in round 1. Nobody wants to watch you push for the playoffs, miss by 4 or 5 points, and get stuck in the middle. You are what you strive for. And what you're striving for in Chuck Fletcher's world is being stuck in the middle, because that is successful enough.
At this point, completely of his own making, by the way, Chuck Fletcher is in a position where he can't say that they're rebuilding because it will cost him his job.
You know what the problem with that statement is? Because you're right to an extent. And here's the thing. You know what? They're getting, in the last week, Scott Lawton's come back, Travis Konechny's come back, Tony DeAngelo missed a game and came back. There's a good chance that Cam Atkinson suits up relatively soon.
Oh, yeah, there have been absurd injuries.
But what I'm getting at, and James Van Riemsdyk is getting close. You should be reaching that timeline soon for a Wade Allison type. There's plenty of guys who are coming back soon. Really, the only guys who are left who you should have question marks about moving forward within the next couple of weeks are Sean Couturier with the back injury, and Ryan Ellis is out for the year.
That's not even a question mark. Well, he's just done.
No, but those should be the only guys you are worried about.
It's just Sean Couturier at this point, right?
And it's going to put close to the best roster you can get out there based on what was assembled. And in that case, you're going to have a week or two to see if that changes things a little bit. Newsflash, so far it has not.
No, right?
But you're going to have a week or two because, grand scheme of things, we did the show last week and talked about Chuck Fletcher. You should fire him first because the longer you let him have the position, the worse it's going to get for things like, I know something? I changed my mind on that. Not that it's worse. It's in the grand scheme of things. If he was fired Monday of this past week is the news drop that we expect, the Monday after every show. If he's fired tomorrow for the Monday news drop, if he's fired in a week, if he's fired in a month, does it make a difference?
Yeah.
You think?
Yeah.
In terms of what?
At any moment, he could pick up the phone and trade Cam York for a piece that helps now.
He's not going to because no one is taking that.
But you get what I'm saying. Is
I know.
He can make a move moving future. What if he trades next year's first round pick? What if he trades the pick? That is something he could do.
Okay, those are those are things he could do. I don't see a market for anything right now. Let's put it this way: you're sitting here telling me if he wanted to move Cam York for
Besser.
Hold on a minute. No, because he's not. First, guess what? He can't trade anything because they don't have contracts. He'd have to even it out, and someone's going to sit there and say, "You want me to give you Brock Besser? Then you're either giving me the draft picks that you need, which I think he knows, or you've got to give up multiple contracts that you don't want to give up." So what's it going to be? You know what I mean?
So JVR goes for the money in the contract spot. The pick goes for the value. And then probably a prospect in there, too, because Chuck Fletcher's going to lose this deal.
Nope. JVR is stuck on this roster until February.
Okay.
That's what I'm getting at. There's no market for JVR.
No, I don't think there's a market for him. I just mean, Vancouver's not doing great. They're on the way down. They're bad. They're going to flip JVR for an asset at the trade deadline. But I think that's the move.
And I
don't even think that's the move, but that's the kind of thing I'm scared of as long as Chuck Fletcher's in charge. I'm not saying they should, obviously.
No, but I'm sitting here saying, okay, like the rumblings I've heard, and Aunt Sanfilippo had this a little bit too, that kind of keep your eyes on the Christmas break.
Okay.
That as these guys come back, because he's leaned on the injury crutch a lot, obviously, but ultimately, if it doesn't turn around anytime soon and there's no path forward here, we're getting to the point where something's going to give just to give. Okay?
Yep.
Now, I have a couple theories on what that could be. Because on one hand, the answer is he just gets fired and everybody, and there was much rejoicing in the city, right? Okay. That's one answer. But what if the answer is, okay, because at this point in time, if they make a decision within the season, I can tell you who is probably getting the job. I can tell you that at this point in time, I would say 70-30, I would be certain of this.
Okay.
Danny Briere would get the job.
Okay.
That it would be, and
would
I'm leaving.
Interim?
Possibly.
Okay.
You know what? I imagine it would be for the rest of this year.
Okay.
But that he would be a very high candidate to take over because, okay, back to the Tortorella press conference for a moment. We talk every day, right? I talk with Chuck, I talk with Brent, and I talk with Danny Briere. And Danny Briere, by the way, is a brilliant hockey mind. Nobody asked him what he thought of Danny Briere. He just the question was
volunteered the information.
The question was how well, what's the communication like when you're trying to build for the
who do you talk to, right?
And do you talk about the things where it's like, hey, you may have contracts that you're not able to move, even though you're thinking of a guy who may not be here in 2-3 years, right? Or who may not be part of that future plan, and you're still stuck with him by contract. And we talk about it every day. By the way, Danny Briere is a brilliant hockey mind. You know what that tells you? It tells you
that a brilliant hockey mind.
Possibly. The real answer.
Sure, I think so.
Well, because the answer to that question is, from my standpoint, is I don't know if Danny Briere is a brilliant hockey mind or not. He might be. He might not be. I have no idea. I haven't seen him in this role to know. He hasn't had this job. A special assistant to the GM is you can sign off on the moves that are being made, but it doesn't mean you were the mastermind behind it.
I would love nothing more, and I will apologize to Paul Holmgren, Bob Clark, and the organization if they hand the keys to Danny Briere and say,
"It's your show.
Tank, rebuild, whatever you want to call it, be bad, build us a winner, period." And then they leave. And they can stay on their titles, but they leave the office. You know what I mean. They go play golf for a while. Delaware Valley has some beautiful golf courses. Let Danny Briere take over. The Philadelphia Flyers, it's been a long time since the Philadelphia Flyers had a generational GM. A guy who's there for 20 years who, and it doesn't happen
Bobby Clark from 87,
sure.
the 80s until roughly. I mean, there was a period in the middle where he was. I get it.
But yes, that kind of thing where it's an institution and it's one person's vision.
Are you kind of talking about it more from let's not use the Flyers as an example, but are you kind of giving me the David Poyle, Nashville kind of thing. Where it's he's been there forever. The only GM they've ever known. The franchise has been around for 25 years.
Hand Danny Briere the keys. Let him strip it down to the absolute studs. And let him build it. If he's a brilliant hockey mind, let him and Tortorella be your duo. And so Tortorella's been around long enough that I could see the two of them working very closely together and having a good relationship, almost as like a co-GM's thing. And not that, but like
you're never going to have.
He's more than a coach. He's got some personnel in.
Well, listen, to say that about Danny Briere, but then gloss over the fact that, by the way, I talked to Chuck and Brent too.
That's fair.
It's a little bit of a, message to anybody who can hear me, kind of like Briere's got some knowledge that I really respect, and I think he knows how to build this thing. And I don't know what's going on with the other two, but they're sitting here talking about playoff spots, and we can get this guy in, it's not the direction to go, right? Like. That's what I mean by that a little bit, like that was brought up that way.
It's only a matter of time until John Tortorella starts blinking furiously in Morse code. Save me, help me, get me out of here.
Well, and this is what I'm saying. Like it's like this is where I'm going with this, because this is the other possibility that I see, and this is not a good possibility, but it's one that I think exists. If the decision is made on Chuck Fletcher by within the next 3 weeks or whatever the case may be, 70-30, I'm thinking Danny Briere is the guy who everybody has in mind. Even let's put it this way, Briere would, at the bare minimum, I think it would be almost 100% possibility that Briere would be able to take over in some respect.
Right.
It could be interim basis, and they just push everything down the line and say, listen, I'll even let Danny Briere, with an overall grand scheme vision that aligns more with what Tortorella sees, say, handle the trade deadline.
Right.
Hell, maybe he's the right guy to do it in that sense, where it's like, hey, listen, at least he knows the long-term plan. Do it. Move JVR, move Justin Braun, move whatever else you can, and get what you can back. Right.
Start creating cap space. Start creating some roster space. Start rebuilding.
But get your third round pick for Justin Braun again, or third or fourth. Get your second for JVR, whatever you can get. Right.
Quite frankly, I think the fact that there's not a lot to do, like you said, makes it a good time.
But whether or not, my point is,
it gives Danny Briere a nice little training wheels trade deadline, is what I'm saying.
It does.
Is it gives
and he's not tasked with. You got Claude Giroux this year. You know what I mean?
You don't have the franchise captain on your hands.
Right. At this point in time, you move the cap from, well, not the cap, but you get what you can for James Van Riemsdyk. Like, you get what you can for Justin Braun on expiring deals.
Right, because you're going to eat half of JVR's cap to get value.
You do it, and you take what you get. And I think that Briere could be tasked with that, sure. Where I'm coming from, where it doesn't make a difference, is if the end goal here is in the next 3 weeks or month or whatever it may be, that Chuck Fletcher just simply gets fired, then whether it happened last week or it happens later this month is neither here nor there. That's calling fair. People up and sending people down isn't making a difference on the roster right this second. Moving a guy to IR because he's hurt doesn't make a difference. That's not grand scheme of things. It still takes him out of the picture before you get to the trade deadline.
I just wonder if the keys have been taken away from him.
My biggest worry is this. What if the decision is, okay, he's no longer the GM, but we're just going to sit there and say he's still the president of hockey operations, or he gets the team president role.
This is the darkest timeline. Timeline.
So that despite the fact that you might say, okay, Danny Briere is the general manager of the team now. Despite that fact, okay, and I asked this, and I'm throwing out some teams that you may not be as well versed on that are around the city, so you may not know the names as well. I think you do, but I'm going to do it anyway because it's for sake of argument.
For the record, if Chuck Fletcher becomes part of the Brain Trust, we're retiring the podcast. I can't do it.
Let's just hold on. Let's.
Okay. Anyway, go for it.
If the Pittsburgh Penguins make a move, do you think that when the press release comes out and all that stuff, it might say General Manager Ron Hextall said
Brian Burke.
But is Brian Burke the guy behind it?
Brian Burke is at least rubber stamping every move.
Or at least when you think of the overall construction of the group, do you think of Brian Burke's plan, Ron Hextall's part of the execution?
I think that has more to do with the specific personality of Brian Burke, to be honest.
Like, what do you mean by that?
Like, for example, do you think Kelly McCrimmon's making the decisions, or is it,
McPhee?
Right. Like,
Yeah,
how
I guess.
involved is George McPhee?
I understand where you're coming from. But my point being, more people would associate what the Pittsburgh Penguins roster looks like, the moves they make, with Brian Burke's the president of hockey operations, more than I think people because Brian Burke is a superior figure to Ron Hextall, just from.
But I think that's personality, right?
Well, personality, historical standpoint, like been around longer, all that, right? If the Phillies make a move in this baseball offseason, the general manager
make a move.
The general manager of the Philadelphia Phillies is Sam Fuld. Do you know that? Like,
it's not still Ruben Amaro Jr.?
It's not.
Okay.
But would anybody even know that Sam Fuld is the general manager, or does everybody just go to Dave Dombrowski did it because Dave Dombrowski's been to went with 4 other organizations, keeps going to World Series? That's the guy I know. He's the guy behind it, right?
That's fair.
If the Sixers do something, Elton Brand is the general manager of the team, but Daryl Morey's the president of operations. And everybody sits there and goes, Daryl Morey's bringing in this guy from Houston. The Harden thing was Morey from Houston, right?
I think president of basketball ops do more than president of hockey ops tend to do, just in general.
Probably, but my point being, if you have a guy like Chuck Fletcher who's been around longer in the role, and you say he's the president of the operation,
he can pull rank whenever he wants.
It's not even he can pull rank. People are still going to associate the move with him. Yep. They're going to sit there and say, well, Danny Briere's just stuck doing whatever he wants to do. So did it really change anything?
Right.
Did it change anything other than the title? Like, it doesn't make Danny Briere the guy who's putting it together any more than he is today.
Right.
To a lot of people.
Well,
which is why that's the move can't be made. But to really put a bow on the whole thing because of the mixed messages thing. Here's really my biggest problem when it comes to the overall vision / not saying that word that they won't say, that he's probably not allowed to say, as you alluded to, that Tortorella isn't.
He's definitely not allowed. No.
You want to know what I really want to know at this point? And I know you've already discussed it, but we've gotten to this point because I'm going to come to a point this week. Wednesday's the day that it's going to really, I guess, officially be, if you will. But let's just go with it. Where I wrote a year ago about Alain Vigneault getting fired, that the coach got fired, and the article that I wrote was titled, Vigneault's departure should only be a starting point for the Flyers. And in the year since, that was on December 7th that I published that article. On January 26th, I published an article that came from a press conference that was takeaways from a press conference that involved Chuck Fletcher and Dave Scott.
Yep.
That featured a lot of answers that everybody was kind of baffled by, right?
God.
Hold on.
Yeah.
March 11th, I published an article titled Wrist-A-Line and Extension Furthers Flyers Confusing Direction. March 20th, Return in Giroux Trade, the result of shortcomings by Flyers management. Noticing a trend here? May 4th, Flyers offseason. Do they even have a plan? June 17th, right or wrong, Flyers going all in on aggressive offseason. June 21st, so I put the word Flyers in every headline, SEO purposes.
Fair enough.
So Flyers on management, hiring an outside agency, and future decisions. July 14th, tear it down. Free agency failing show why Flyers need a front office rebuild. September 20th, plan of hope already backfires on Flyers. October 12th, on eve of Flyers season, expectations and anticipation at all-time low. November 27th, my most recent on this, GM change should only be the start of Flyers overhaul. In basically every month, and then I just wrote about the mixed messages this week between the two press conferences.
Right.
In every month of the last calendar year, just about. That's a total of 12 articles. So one per month. Some spanned out more than others.
Sure.
I've written something about management. Had to address management in some way.
I'm willing to bet in the 3 years leading up to that, not really a whole lot about management.
Do you know the last time I remember writing something that significantly?
When Ron Hextall got fired?
It was the weekend before because they lost to Toronto 6-0.
Yep.
And realistically, I wasn't writing about management. I was writing about management like as in you can't stand idle anymore. This coach isn't working out. That was still Dave Haxtell. And it's like, look.
That was the Andreas Janssen hat trick game, right?
Yep.
Yeah, that I refer to that as the Jim Jackson headset game.
The reason why I even wrote what I did after that is because I didn't watch okay. This is not the first time I've done this. I'm going to do this again. I'm pulling out a classic John Tortorella line to an extent. Okay? Because I remember how I kept pulling out the I have no idea line earlier. So my line from this one is that night when they lost 6-0, the Andreas Janssen hat trick game.
Yeah.
I didn't even watch the game after the first period. I didn't even watch. No. I mean, it was on. I was trying to cover the game, but I spent the rest of the game back and forthing it with fans on Twitter because that was more of a story at that given moment.
And it's probably more entertaining too, to be honest.
The biggest issue at this point, whether we continue to talk about management, whatever, blah, 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 the whole thing, because everybody wants to sit there and go, Chuck Fletcher has no clue what he's doing. He's delusional. Fire him. Doesn't mean it's a wrong statement, but it's not that simple, right? It obviously is not that simple.
Right.
Everybody's going to sit there and listen. I wanted to. I'm not saying I'm taking credit alone for it. I think that everybody who does what I've been doing the last few years has brought this on. There's some credit to be had for. If I would have asked you in 2019, let's just go off of that.
You're going to ask me something from the 12 months right before COVID? Oh, good luck. Okay.
Because your answer is going to probably be no.
Okay.
And it's okay. Did you know who Dave Scott was?
Not really, no.
Okay. Do you know how many people bring him up now? Because
Too many for his sake, I'm sure.
Because we keep talking about he's the governor of the team. He's the acting ownership, right?
For the record, is the correct thing to do.
Okay. Now, again, something that I'm sure you knew, but maybe more of the common fan didn't. Because I'm talking to you, and you do the show do the show, so you know a little more than the common person, I think.
As well as multiple sim leagues, yeah.
Did you know that Comcast owned the team?
Just a little, yeah.
Okay. Did you know
To be fair, I've also known that Comcast owned the team since about 1995 or whenever.
Well, okay, not okay. I don't mean it like that. I mean, were you ever calling out Comcast as much?
Not really. No. Well, no, because there wasn't any need to. The team was still having success.
Okay, but when the time came and you needed to, where could you turn? After Ed Snyder passed away, where could you turn?
Comcast.
To an extent. No, I mean
everyone there was knowledge. I remember conversations happening when Ed Snyder passed about the humanity leaving the Flyers and the corporatization of it all. And
right, but in the early couple of years, you were still kind of going off of it's still the core group, and it's the coach may be wrong.
Yeah, no,
right?
absolutely.
No, when the coach is the wrong answer, then you look at the general manager. When the GM's the wrong answer, you're looking at, to be honest, you know who you were still looking at that time? You were still looking at Paul Holmgren.
Yep.
Hey, Paul, what are you doing?
Because he was still the president of hockey ops.
Right. What are you doing? Why is this still a thing? Why are we not making any changes? Or better yet, we didn't feel the need that there was a change that should have been made. It was Ron Hextall has a process, but this coach ain't it. Get him out of there. If Ron Hextall would have fired Dave Hextall, there's a chance he might still be here.
I agree.
Chance.
I agree.
Potentially. I don't know that for sure and certain. Granted, the reason why he got fired was because the vision started to not line up in terms of all of a sudden it was back to it's go time, start bringing in guys, right?
From all the stuff we've heard since.
And the tyrant stuff, right?
It's hard to imagine he would still be here. Just because we know how much the alumni hated him. We know how much he rankled with the front office. Like he wasn't well liked.
Right.
But I think there's a chance that the team would have been more successful and they wouldn't have had a choice.
Okay, fair enough. But ultimately the reason, because we are 1 day removed. Remember the part last week where it was, hey, by the way, that Saturday game was 4 years since Hextall got fired? Well, Saturday night when they lose 3-2 to the Devils, when John Tortorella has his first, I'm not like you're asking me dumb questions, I'm out of here in 50 seconds press conference, right? That was 4 years to the day that Chuck Fletcher was officially hired.
So Chuck Fletcher's had his job for 4 years.
Yep, as we speak with it. And
well, I certainly don't think he makes it to 5.
I hear you. But beyond that, just hear me out. I believe, first, the two things that I've learned or the two takeaways I've had from the past week or so from the time I wrote Chuck Fletcher, everybody's chanting fire Fletcher, but that's only the beginning of this. Like, that should be the starting point. There's more to be done beyond that, because it's not just him. It's everybody else that sits next to him. It's, it continues to be, with maybe the slight exception of Danny Briere in an interim role. Try him out, see if you like him, kind of thing. There's not much more that should stick around, right?
Right.
And the amount of people that are sitting here that will talk about Dave Scott doesn't know hockey, so he shouldn't be in charge of any of this. He needs to be removed. Comcast should sell, blah, 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 right? The amount of people that say that, it shows how much, because I remember going on the air and talking about, because who runs the Flyers? Like, I got asked that question. It was directly asked, who runs the Flyers? And I say, okay, the guy's name is Dave Scott. And this was this was like April of 2021.
Right.
We're nearly 2 years down the line from that point. And we're
people know Dave Scott's name now.
We're 2 seasons, and people know who Dave Scott is now. And people, because the day I went on air and said that to, when I go on Mike Gill's show on 97.3, Mike Gill sat there, and even his response when I said the name Dave Scott, as I started to explain who he was I wouldn't be able to pick Dave Scott out of a lineup.
Oh, no, me neither. He's a boring executive.
Yeah,
I know what he looks like. But if you put him in a lineup of similarly looking men, I wouldn't be able to tell.
But now people do, because that tweet or that meme, if you want to call it a meme, it's not really a meme with any wording on it, but this picture of him sitting comfortably in the lounge chair in the top of the Wells Fargo Center when the remodeling was done, right?
Yep.
That floats around. People know who Dave Scott is now, and people know that Comcast has their hands still all over this thing, and that the concept is when a business owns the franchise, that what is it about at that point?
Yep.
It's another business. It's another business entity that, as long as it performs, it's okay, right?
I have never in my life seen a fan base. I'm sorry to cut you off here. I have never seen in my life a fan base this dedicated to getting a rebuild. And that's what we're upset about, is that we're not getting the rebuild. That's the crazy part. We don't want to win. We want to suck.
And do you know what the real big thing about this is, though, too, when it comes to the rebuild thing? Because it's obvious that that's where they are. Right? I want you to tell me, and the standings right now is the standings or recent playoffs is a great reminder of why this is this should be a topic of conversation. Can you find me a team that is above that word, is above going down that path? Were the New Jersey Devils above going down that road?
No, they did it.
Were the Toronto Maple Leafs above going down that road?
They did it. Boston didn't do it.
No, but Boston knows it's possibly inevitable.
Boston's looking forward to doing it, right?
Boston did one thing this year, and so far it has worked like a charm. And what Boston did this year was, we're taking one more shot. Come back Bergeron. Come back Krejci.
Oh, this is the last dance.
Let's give it one more go. And so far, hell if it ain't working.
Vegas hasn't done it, but they've only existed for 5 years.
Right. Vegas hasn't had to do the same thing with Seattle. Seattle's a top 5 team, by the way.
And quite frankly, Seattle did do it.
Right.
Last year was Seattle doing it.
To an extent, sure.
Yeah.
Was it above the Colorado Avalanche to go down that road?
No, they certainly did it.
Okay. And I want to go, again, I go back to, I know I'm repeating one I just said, but then I'm going to say 2 more, and I'm going to hammer home the point. Was it above the Toronto Maple Leafs to do this?
No, they did it.
Okay. Was it above the Detroit Red Wings to do it?
They're just coming out of it.
Was it above the New York Rangers to send a letter that says we're doing it?
No. Quite frankly, it's actually absurd that the Flyers have never really rebuilt.
Is it currently above the Chicago Blackhawks to put the roster that they have out there and say, this is what we're doing?
Even the Montreal Canadiens did it.
So why is every team that's been around for near 100 years able to sit there and say, you know what? We got to fess up that it's time. We got to rebuild. Why can't the Philadelphia Flyers, after 50 years, say we're rebuilding it?
Because I believe all those teams, maybe with the exception of the Rangers, are owned by people and families as opposed to corporations.
I'm
willing to put that into it.
I'd have to dig deeper. Because I think Toronto is actually like an entertainment group.
MLSE, that's fair. That is fair. That's valid.
And Toronto was never above, hey, listen, we should go out there and try to be a bad team. Colorado is also owned by a group, I believe, too.
Okay. Well,
like teams are owned by groups now. It's the way it goes.
The nice thing about where the Flyers are at is whether they want to be or not, they're just kind of going to be bad. So we're going to get our results whether we want to or not.
Right. To put a bow on the episode for this week, basically,
Yes.
If you thought it was impossible that they would end up at the bottom, given the other teams, right? That like, oh, Columbus might not be able to climb out of this, or Chicago or whatever. The only team that's in your way of the last place spot, as far as I'm concerned, is Anaheim.
Yep.
Because every other team has games in hand or is within a point of you.
Quite frankly,
they're all within 3.
If the league is rigged and you want to give the Flyers 400 national games every year, that's fine. Can you rig a draft lottery for us, please?
Even if you don't get Bedard, did you see the highlights of Fantilli?
Yeah, Fantilli, Michkov. Like, it's a good draft to get a top 3 pick. Please don't bump us to 5th, for the love of God.
Oh, they can if they finish last.
I know. Well, not if they finish second to last.
Second to last, they can only bump them to 4th.
Oh, okay. I forgot about that.
It's 2 drawings now, not 3. So
right.
So if you finish last, you're getting a top 3. If you finish second, you have a 75% chance of coming away with a top 3.
We love that. All right. That's going to do it for the show. We're going to end a lot of shows with, the draft pick. So
every show we finish from here on out, we should look at the bottom of the standings and see how close they are.
Pretty much. We should. Right now, they are 27th. 6 points from the bottom.
They are 1 point from 28th and 3 from 29th, 30th, and 31st. That's where I'm going.
All right. Well, we'll be back next week for an update on that. Make sure to follow us on Twitter at YWT Podcast. Follow Kevin at Kevin_Durso. You can find the show anywhere you find your podcasts. Facebook, Instagram, Podbean, iTunes, Google Podcasts, Spotify, sportstalkphilly.com. I think we're on Pandora, too. Amazon Music, Amazon Podcasts, whatever they are. Find us wherever you want, and we'll be back next week. Until then, we'll see you.